Welcome back to Morning Joe. Ukraine's General Prosecutor's Office announced just this morning it is reviewing past investigation into the gas company which Joe Biden's son Hunter was a board member. The review is part of a long-planned restructuring that predates President Trump's call with Ukrainian President Zelensky in July. According to the Washington Post, the Prosecutor General said no foreign or Ukrainian official has been in touch with him to request the audit. The criminal probe, which focused on tax irregularities and not on Hunter Biden, was closed in 2016. President Trump claims that was because of pressure from former Vice President Joe Biden. There's no evidence of that. The Wall Street Journal also reports President Trump ordered the removal of America's ambassador to Ukraine, career diplomat Marie Yovanovitch, after months of complaints from Trump's personal attorney Rudy Giuliani and other allies outside the administration. People familiar with the matter telling the Journal that this morning. Those individuals, including Giuliani, claimed Ambassador Yovanovitch was undermining Trump and was obstructing efforts to persuade Ukraine to investigate Joe Biden. Giuliani confirmed that reporting in an interview with the paper. Sources and officials also telling the Journal the State Department was told in the spring that removing Ambassador Yovanovitch was a priority for the president and that Secretary of State Mike Pompeo supported that move. Yesterday, President Trump did not deny those reports.
Mr. President, why did you recall the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine? Was she a problem? Why did you recall her?
I heard very bad things about her. And I don't know if I recalled her or somebody recalled her, but I heard very, very bad things about her for a long period of time. Not good.
And the State Department knew that the president wanted her recalled.
Willie, to Mike's earlier point about the flood of stuff, as I'm listening to you read, after you start to gaze a little, that's the problem. This story is so, the more we dig into it, as opposed to just keeping it that simple sentence,
it's intentional.
That's when you start to lose it. We're all sitting around the table and you're reading, and it's like, what?
And that's not a flood of information from the president. That's just news.
That's what I'm just saying. So it's like this thing, as this thing twists and turns, we got to keep the headline up.
And there'll be more today, Willie.
Joining us now, Professor of International Politics at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University, Daniel Drezner, journalist in residence at Georgetown University School of Foreign Service, Elise Labott, and NBC News White House correspondent Kristen Welker. Good morning to you all. Kristen, let me start with you. The view from the White House this morning. The President of the United States tweeting yesterday he has the absolute right to investigate corruption in other countries. How are they feeling right now with this flood of reports that came through last night?
Well, first, what we expect today, Willie, is defiance from the White House. Remember, they had gotten document requests from House committees on Capitol Hill, and the big question swirling around this administration was how would they answer? Well, now we are getting our answer, according to a source familiar with the matter, telling me overnight that as soon as today, the White House is preparing to send a letter to House Speaker Nancy Pelosi saying they're not going to turn over any documents until they hold a vote to officially open an impeachment inquiry. Sources here have been saying, look, the bottom line is she held a press conference, so we don't have to comply with these document requests. So defiance on the one hand. On the other hand, Willie, how are they feeling today? I think there's a divide within Trump world about how to deal with this growing controversy that is engulfing the Trump presidency. On the one hand, you have aides and allies, some of them saying, we need a strategy here. We need clear messaging. We need to be able to respond to these mountains of headlines that are coming in by the hour, really, in real time. And then you have the other side of Trump world, which is basically trying to make the case, nothing to see here, business as usual. And I think that's what you saw from President Trump this week. He clearly wants to be his own best messenger. We saw that during the press conference. But the result of that, and his allies are concerned about this, are those outbursts that we saw, that anger that we saw from President Trump. This was a tactic that he used during the Mueller investigation. There's a lot of skepticism. It'll work this time, Willie. Yeah,
I mean, his own best messenger came out on the South Lawn yesterday and just said out in the open that he wants Ukraine to investigate the Bidens, and then said he thinks China should do the same. How does the White House defend that comment to you?
They have not. And that was the big question here at the White House throughout the day yesterday. Will you defend what the president did on the South Lawn? The response that we got over and over again, Willie, was no comment. And so essentially they're not saying anything. But what we witnessed yesterday, that remarkable moment, essentially shifted the debate from what the president did to whether calling for a foreign government's help is acceptable, Willie.
Elise, one of the people defending the President of the United States in all of this is the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, who actually was listening in on that phone call, and he finally remembered the fact that he was listening in after 4 or 5 days. But the status of the State Department's role in this whole Ukrainian mess, the personnel at the State Department, I understand there's a real morale issue at the State Department, has been for some time, but it's growing. What do you hear?
That's right, Mike. I mean, I have seen from my sources talking to them that there's a concern about Secretary Pompeo, and on one hand trying to balance the policy of the State Department, at the other hand trying to answer his audience of one President Trump. And let's be clear, Secretary Pompeo, we know, has future political ambitions, whether it's senator, governor of Kansas from his home state, or the presidency. In this particular instance, my sources say that he never told Kurt Volker, the envoy to Ukraine, that he was on that call with President Trump and the president of Ukraine. He knew about this insinuation, President Trump asking for information on Joe Biden, and I think it's very important to note what the president did here. He's putting this all under the guise of fighting corruption. Until that call with the president of Ukraine, he never mentions Joe Biden. But Giuliani, the ambassador to the EU, Gordon Sondland, all of them are putting this under the guise of fighting corruption. And then you have this weak Ukraine government that needs the aid, wants a good relationship with the new president. And you have the envoy from the State Department. These people trying to, placate President Trump, advise the Ukrainians, and also at the same time try to get the aid through, get that visit through, while at the same time trying to advise the Ukrainians not to get involved in U.S. politics. So you have this bunch of diplomats trying to fight the system that President Trump and Giuliani created, and Secretary Pompeo knows better. He knows the State Department shouldn't have been touching this.
Dan, Secretary Pompeo knew that the State Department shouldn't have been touching this, but he seemingly has been involved at several key inflection points. We saw how the diplomats involved in this particular episode tried to protest, rebel, stall. What does the future hold for Secretary Pompeo among the rank and file of the State Department, who are loyal to the institution and not necessarily to President Trump?
I mean, I think it's safe to say that he's lost the support of most of the diplomatic corps and foreign service officers. And we saw this actually, I think, come out most clearly when he made that sort of defiant statement that he wouldn't allow his diplomats to testify in front of the House, claiming that what he cared about was protecting foreign service officers. And most of the diplomatic corps knew that was a complete crock because, among other things, he supported apparently the recall of Ambassador Yovanovitch. He has not removed an assistant secretary of state who was abusive towards career officers based on political motivations. And now we realize that essentially by supporting what Giuliani and Trump wanted, he essentially allowed people like Kurt Volker to implicate themselves in the text messages that we read. Kurt Volker, by all accounts, was an honorable diplomat when he entered in this administration. And, he probably tried to navigate this as best he could. But when, his Secretary of State and when his president make it clear that this illegal thing is a priority, they wind up engaging in text messages that make it very clear there was an illegal quid pro quo. It's rather appalling, frankly, that it turns out it's the Ukrainians that behave more ethically in all of this than the Americans.
Yeah, I mean, Gene, for people who read the summary of the call, the July 25th call, and somehow weren't convinced that the president was engaged in an implicit quid pro quo, or for people who somehow doubt the whistleblower and how that report came to be, I encourage them to read these text messages because the people representing the United States in Ukraine knew very clearly what their job was, the direction from the White House.
No, exactly. You had Rudy Giuliani out there. You had the U.S. ambassador to the European Union. Basically, the two of them out there trying to gin up this investigation in Ukraine. That was the central focus of U.S. policy toward Ukraine, getting this investigation on that would vindicate Trump's conspiracy theory and dirty up Joe Biden. Just a question for Dan Drezner. Have you seen any prior evidence of the Trump administration's deep and abiding concern about corruption in the world? It seems that they're comfortable, to me at least, they're comfortable dealing with a lot of corrupt regimes, including Russia and Saudi Arabia and Egypt and the Philippines and others. Yet in Ukraine, this seems to be a sudden sticking point.
I would say that the Trump White House and the Trump family have a deep and abiding concern with corruption, so long as they get their cut of it. Yes. One of the more appalling things about this, frankly, is that in claiming that this is all about anti-corruption, Donald Trump is really sort of taking a page from the playbook of Vladimir Putin or Xi Jinping or Mohammed bin Salman. These are three leaders that, when they came to power, claimed they wanted to fight corruption and launch an anti-corruption drive. But in truth, that anti-corruption drive, even though there was corruption in these countries, was really an effort to knock out political opponents. And so what's truly appalling about this is that Donald Trump isn't acting like the President of the United States. He's acting like a tin pot dictator who keeps claiming he has the absolute right to do stuff that he, in fact, does not have the absolute right to do.
Michael Steele?
Hey, Kristen, this Michael Steele here for you. Mike Barnacle raised a point early in the hour that I think is very important and should not be lost in any of this conversation. That is how the president is coming at this and how it's being perceived and received, not just by Republicans on the Hill, but by the American people writ large. In your reporting and in your conversations, do you get the sense that there is a certain level of confidence or even cockiness with respect to the president's approach to this, that he thinks that he's reinforced by the public perception that he's the fighter, he's the soldier who's carrying forward on behalf of the American people, and all of this other stuff is the kind of thing that he was sent to Washington to push back against, and therefore he has no problem saying, yeah, I'm going to do this because this is what the American people want me to do, to fight for them, and this is how I do that.
I think there are two things happening inside the White House and with the president's allies. On the one hand, you do have that type of bravado. The president himself has pointed to the fact that his campaign has been fundraising off of this. They've raised a lot of money over the past week, and so they want to make the case that that's what's happening. At the same time, Michael, I can tell you in my conversations, the president is looking at the polls quite closely, and support for this impeachment inquiry has been increasing pretty significantly, and I'm told he's concerned that if support for impeachment writ large tops 50%, that he's going to be in real trouble, and that's when Republicans are going to really start to feel pressure about all of this. I want to go back to what you all are discussing, though, in terms of the broader context. Everything that we witnessed. President Trump yesterday out on the South Lawn calling for China to investigate Joe Biden. That didn't happen in a vacuum. Next week, they are going to be holding talks with Chinese officials about the trade dispute that is going on and that is escalating. And as Elise pointed out, the discussion that President Trump had with the president of Ukraine didn't happen in a vacuum. It happened with Ukraine desperately needing U.S. aid. And so part of my conversations with White House officials, with Trump aides, has been about that. How can you disentangle what we heard from President Trump from what these countries need from the U.S.? And it's a really tough case to make, but that's going to be their challenge moving forward.
NBC's Kristen Welker on another busy day at the White House. Kristen, thanks so much. Elise Labott, as we talk about the statement that the president made yesterday out on the South Lawn about Ukraine, but then moving to China as well, that was backed up by a CNN report last night that found on June 18th he had a call with President Xi, where he suggested that also China and its government should look into the Bidens and look into potential corruption with his potential political opponent. It's unclear where the end of this is. In other words, if we've got Ukraine and China so far, we know both of those calls went into that secret vault where they've been keeping transcripts of calls they don't want people to know about. We don't know what else is out there.
We don't, and there is no end to your question, Willie, because not only is the president making these relationships and kind of weaponizing those relationships with the U.S., making them very transactional. I have this for you, but hey, I need a favor though. Do this for me. But he's kind of opening the floodgates to this system where anything goes. He's telling China to look into Biden. Who knows what's going to be next? And it's not just inviting these countries, whether it's China, whether it's find Russia, find the Hillary Clinton emails, to look into the U.S. system and help him. He's also giving these authoritarians around the world a green light to continue with corruption or continue with political persecution in their own countries. This is an area where the U.S. used to fight around the world, and now it's opening the floodgates to really the system where authoritarians, President Trump certainly didn't create it, but it's on the rise, and he's basically encouraging it.
Elise Labott, thank you very much. Dan Drezner, thank you as well. There have been several new developments with this Ukraine scandal.